Hello students, I hope you're doing great. Welcome back to our learning video. Today we are going to learn an interesting material. Before we learn about the materials, let's see the basic competence, indicators, and our learning goals. The basic competence is comparing and getting contextual meaning related to social functions, text structure, and language features of several oral and written narrative texts by giving and asking for information related to short and simple fairy tales. Indicators in this material are identify and analyze social functions, text structures, and language features of a fairy tales, and also getting moral value from a fairy tale and retell a simplified fairy tale. Our learning goals or our learning objectives in this material are: you are able to identify types of narrative text along with the social functions and language features, and you are able to retell a fairy tales with your own words. Character value in this material are creativity and hospitality. It means that you are going to as creative as you can to retell a fairy tales of your own version. And hospitality means you are applying the moral value from a narrative text. Have you watched this? This? How about this one? Or this one? I'm sure that you already know some of these things. Today, we are going to learn about narrative text. Narrative is a piece of writing that tells a story. The story can be imaginary or based on real incident. A narrative created in a constructive format that describes a sequence of fictional or non-fictional events. There are several types of narrative text such as fable. Fable is a story about animal which behave like human. A fable is a narrative that making a moral point traditionally by means of animal characters who speak and act like human beings. For example, mouse, deer, and tiger. The next one is legend. Legend is a story of human action that causes a myth of a place. It's a simple story which relates to on how place is formed. For example, Sangkuriang and Gunung Tangkuban Perahu, or the story of Toba Lake. Fairy tale. Fairy tale is a story that usually involves imaginary creatures and magic. It is a story which relates much with magic things such as fairies, wizards, and goblins. For example, Cinderella, Beauty and the Beast, the story of Rapunzel, and many more. Folktale. Folktale is a traditional story handed down through generations by people of certain region. It is a story passed on by word of mouth and shared among people of a culture. For example, Cinderella's. Myth. A myth is a story told from the previous generations to the next generations and became a feature of every culture. A myth explains natures, history, and customs. It is often supernatural and explaining the origins of a cultural practice or natural phenomenon. For example, the story of Dewi Sri and the story of Nyi Roro Kidul. The purpose of narrative text is to amuse or to entertain the people with a story. However, narratives can also be written to teach or inform, to change attitudes or social opinions. Now let's move to the generic structure of a narrative text. The first generic structure of narrative text is orientation. Orientation is opening paragraph. It sets the scene, when and where the story happens, and introduces the participants or the characters of the story, who and what are involved in the story. The next one is complication. This is the part where the problems in the story is developed. It tells the beginning of the problems which leads to the crisis of the main characters or participants. The next one is resolution. This is the part where the problems in the story is solved. The problems or the crisis is resolved, either in happy ending or sad or even tragic endings. The next part is reorientation. Reorientation is optional. It is a closing remark to the story. It contains moral lesson or advice that we can learn from the story. Now let's move on to the language features of narrative text. Language features means the tense or the rules that used in narrative text. There are several language features in narrative text. Using past tense, whether it's simple past, past perfect, or past continuous. Using action verbs such as climb, turn, and brought. Using time connector or time conjunctions to arrange the events. For example, then, before, after that, and etc. Using adverb of time such as once upon a time, one day, few years later, and etc. Using direct speech. For example, you should go now, said Cinderella. Using indirect speech. For example, the witch said she didn't find the apple. Using adjectives such as beautiful, old, young, and etc. Using adverb such as happily, carefully, and etc. Well, I think that's all about narrative text in this learning video. I hope you learned something. Stay safe, stay healthy, and goodbye.